Hey everyone, welcome back this week to another episode of The Followers, episode 20, I think. So a little bit of a milestone there for us. Clap on the back, fair play. This week we are going to continue our little series from strength, power, progression, and finally now onto speed. Speed development and that for on the field or on the court, whatever your sport is, but actually putting that strength and power development into the end product, which is our speed development and progression. So I suppose we'll jump right into it. Murph, have you a few bits you'd like to take off with?
Yeah, so really talking about speed, it's kind of a continuation of power. When we were talking 2 weeks ago about power exercise, power development, how we measure it and everything, power is obviously used in some sports, like for your jumps, your tackles, all like that. But it's also like to increase your power will also have a knock-on effect to speed. And if you look at a lot of the work sprinters do, particularly their gym style work or maybe some warm-up exercises, they're there to increase power, which has in turn a benefit to their overall speed. I think even just to look at the importance of speed in general, like our backgrounds are largely field-based sports. That the players that always stand out in your mind, or that you notice, or that are the ones that are kind of ones to watch, either from an opposition point of view as the most dangerous players, or maybe the players you may be in some way jealous of, tend to be the faster and more powerful players. Oftentimes they're born with that and it's a genetic thing. But even if you are currently slow, can you become not necessarily fast, but a bit faster than you are now? And that's what we look at today in terms of like how do you measure overall speed? How do you develop it in terms of what exercises do you do? But also how often? Because gym work, if you went to the gym every day, even like with a poor enough plan, you get stronger, you get a bit bigger. It's hard enough to like mess it all up. Whereas speed, you do need a little bit more thought into the overall process that you're going through, just because you have to manage fatigue an awful lot better. You have to manage freshness an awful lot better. And like again, go to the gym, do some exercises poorly, unless like you're really getting out of position with rounded back deadlifting or like your shoulders just going all over the place benching. You're not going to completely wreck yourself. And you will still make improvements. Whereas a lot of the speed stuff, unless you're doing them properly, they're largely just time fillers and you're not going to get a benefit from them. And that's kind of what we want to focus in on today. Before we go any further, the first thing I'd like to kind of make a distinction between is top speed and acceleration. And we look at both of those today, how we develop both of them, because you would take a slightly different approach to them. And even like from working with teams in the past, I'll generally focus on acceleration on one day. So say if you're training twice a week, one day I'll take an acceleration focus, and on the other day I'll take a top speed focus. Just before we dig into either of those, have you any points to add on either of those, or how you go about developing it yourselves, or noticing it in players?
Yeah, I like the way you included our little disclaimer where you're saying we're not going to make slow players fast. We're just going to make slow players less slow. I like that as a way to approach speed in general. But yeah, I suppose the only thing I'd say is with speed training, a lot of it comes down to kind of mechanics. So we're going to be pulling parts from you're going to be pulling parts from strength training. You pull parts from power and plyometric training. A lot of it has to do with how you apply those different traits. So again, we're going to be talking a lot about how you're applying force, how you're applying power in order to build acceleration and build speed. So there's a lot of, even when you're not training speed directly, there is a lot more to it than just those speed days. So it's important that it's not going to be, if you do one speed session a week, it's not going to necessarily make you much quicker. Whereas if you're encompassing this with proper strength training, with power and plyometric drills, that's when you'll really start to see the difference.
And the only thing I would add in on that too is for any athlete that is listening, or any coach maybe who maybe is a little bit unsure and things, that you do actually have to run to increase your speed as well. That focusing on your speed development in the gym setting, focusing on that power and development, and that all contributes. But you do actually have to run if you want to get faster at running. You have to run faster, and you have to practice that. So it's just something that I suppose I just felt like touching on, because it's something I've met and seen get overlooked when speed and acceleration are looked to be increased. That the actual action and in sport demands that need to be practiced as well with it. Often, that actual running can be overlooked, and it's almost kind of seen that we're doing the power work in the gym, so therefore we will automatically move faster on the field. Whereas it does need work, it does need a bit of focus, and it does need practice.
Yeah, so like an awful lot of activities you want to get better at, the best way to get better at is to do more of it up to a point. And while you can do as much specific power and speed work in the gym, if you scrapped all of that and just focused on sprinting twice a week, it would be very difficult not to get faster. And that should form the core basis of your speed development program. Often, that's obviously going to have two large benefits. Number one, it's going to make you faster because you just get faster from the sprinting and getting better at that. But it will also have a strong conditioning effect for your hamstrings, because hamstrings go when you're sprinting hard, and we know it's probably the most common injury, or certainly one of the most common injuries in field-based sports, where you do reach reasonably high speeds, or you're in a position where you get to sprint reasonably fast at some stage. To prepare the hamstrings adequately for that, you need to sprint. Now, you can go all out sprint or even just quite high speed, and like working with teams before, I would usually aim for around 1,500 to 2 kilometers a week of high speed running. That's above 17 kilometers an hour. And even on top of that, I would try and do 4 to 6 top speed runs, ideally when players are at their freshest. Number one, because you do need to be fresh to get the benefit from true speed work. It also gives as much recovery time between games. So if you're playing Saturday and Saturday, you'll probably look to do that sprint on either Tuesday or Wednesday, because you have enough time to recover since the last game, so you're reasonably fresh, but it also gives you time ahead of yourself to recover from that sprinting there. As well, now they're the two main things. The other one I really find the most beneficial is that nothing really impacts your central nervous system to the same extent as sprinting does, because it uses so much of your body. You're developing such high velocities and you're just incorporating so many muscles at once that the knock-on impact to other elements of your fitness, I think, cannot be met through much other than sprinting. Just the overall, because like realistically, improving fitness is coping with that stress response in the body, and sprinting at absolute top speed is probably the largest stressor you can place in your body. Give yourself those 2 to 3 days then to recover from that. Parasympathetic nervous system all kicks in like that. I'm not going to go deep on all that now. That's what truly prepares you for larger stressors coming up in the future, whether it be tackles, sprinting after people, away from people, whatever it may be. I think they're some of the real benefits that sprinting will bring. Plus, once you've a decent bit of space, you can access. You don't need a gym. You don't need fancy bands. You don't need sleds. You don't need any of the really fancy stuff. You just need, leave down a couple of cones and sprint. They'd be the main kind of points I would see as the benefits of it. Anything else yourselves on that?
No, that's how I think about it as well. It's just it is just that simplicity of getting out and sprinting, and that maximal output that comes from it. You're right, like it's very hard to get that replicated in any other way, whereas in a very short space of time, you can really achieve a lot because everything is involved, and weaknesses tend to show up very, very quickly in that setting.
Yeah, and to be fair to sprinting, while it is something you can overthink, you will actually get an awful lot for some really basic stuff. And you can go to the full extent of, I remember chatting to a few sprinters and athletics coaches when I was in college, and saying they got massive benefits from going to a track, putting on spikes and having someone just looking at them. And you sprinted when you were younger, Damien, did you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember once or twice just getting the end of a set of spikes off someone and sprinting. Well, sprinting for me is still quite slow on a track. And I've never felt myself work as hard. I could feel like, I do have hamstrings. And you can, the spikes, because they allow you to claw the ground that little bit better and propel you forward. I was sore for a week after doing 3 60-meter sprints. There's just nothing, as you said, to give you that maximum output like sprinting at top speed.
One of the things actually with spikes, Murph, that it forces, you realize it very quickly is, especially when sprinting, is if you're not landing on the ball of your foot, it's not comfortable to land on your heel when you're wearing spikes. Whereas when you're wearing runners, any good quality runner, there is a good degree of cushioning there, and some people just don't notice that they run landing on the heel of their foot. Even at full throttle, they still run landing on the heel of their foot or flat-footed, and that is almost taken out of the equation when you have spikes on, because it is very uncomfortable to land on your heel there in spikes. They are designed very specifically for sprinting, and that ball of the foot hitting the ground is really forced into you, and that, I think, that kind of brings your hamstrings in so much more, and it really forces them to actually do the work that they're required to do.
Yeah. When it comes as well to the top speed development, some people made the argument that in an awful lot of sports you never actually reach top speed. Now, that's fair enough. That, like, it is difficult to reach it, particularly, fatigue towards the end of games. You're never actually running in a straight line for a particularly long time. But again, thinking back to developing max strength, to increase your ability to sprint at 80 or 85% a number of times, the best way to make that easier is just to increase your overall 100%, as opposed to spending loads and loads of reps doing the 80 to 85% efforts. That by increasing your 100%, those 80 and 85% efforts suddenly become 75, 77% and are less fatiguing overall. Now, so we divide up into acceleration and top speed drills. Acceleration, I would usually focus on those kind of first 5 to 10, maybe 15 meters. The skill involved in both is actually quite different. So for acceleration, you're generally going to be leaning forward, kind of 45 to 60 degrees for the majority of it. You're going to have the same in your shin angle. Some of the drills I'd use for that, if everyone is just to go over against the wall, take about a meter to a meter and a half a step back, lean against it with your hands pressed against it. I'm doing the hand motion now, which I realize is completely irrelevant for a podcast. Lean against the wall so that you're in a perfectly straight line from foot to hand, right through your body. Lift up one knee and one toe, really focus on engaging the hip flexor and engaging the muscles in your shin to pull your toe up. And then as quickly as possible, swap your feet over. So if you're working with a group of athletes, you can have the 20, 24 of them leaning against the wall, and on the whistle, they swap feet. Some people will try to progress on to swapping both feet. So you start with your right foot on the ground, left leg in the air, blow the whistle, they swap and swap back immediately. I would be very, very slow to move on to that one, because I think it takes so long to actually get the positioning right of even just a 1 foot change and get into a position where your knee and your toe are up immediately again. And you also have your shins moving in a straight line as opposed to that curved circle you're looking for. Do 10 to 12 reps of those and then put it straight into some little accelerations. And even just like getting athletes focused on starting one knee and 1 foot underground as opposed to starting from standing, or starting like with someone behind you holding yourself so you're slightly leaning forward and you're automatically in that position. And the other thing I find helps massively is getting them doing it racing. So having two athletes not necessarily beside each other, maybe one a meter ahead of the other, so it forces that, like, there's something to chase down. Because as much as like you're focused on intent and getting athletes to push themselves, nothing brings that out in people who are competitive like an element of competition. And that's like usually just setting up 1 meter apart, or they start beside each other but they're facing slightly different directions, or one starts lying on the ground and one starts kneeling, just to force that bit of a race there. And I'm not
actually,
going
one
to
of the
do
things on the
pile more than that, other than just reps of those at least once a week for 5, 6, 7 weeks, and you will start to see improvements. And adding in that cue of your first few steps, imagine you're on a treadmill and you're pushing the belt back. Go on, Damien.
No, I was just going to say just about, the progression there. Say when you're leaning against a wall or a fence, working the knee drive position, toe up, and that, like going for just a single rep, a single leg. Just that I've noticed that people will like if you go 1-2 to go back to the start position, that sometimes people will kind of cheat in the middle and they don't concentrate on the technique as much, and it really is about kind of trying to
you're trying to program in that technique and not just kind of get through the movement, where a lot of athletes, even if you explain to them, will just try to get through the movement, you know, to kind of go, yeah, look, I'm back to where I started, and they won't focus in on the quality of the movement that you're actually looking for. But I agree, like I have the same approach with those chasing games, like or those chasing runs, you know, where you're talking to people, letting them know kind of what you're looking for, but then you put them into a race against each other, and you can really start to see, you know, the difference in people and how they apply the changes or little edits that you're trying to make there.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point about the changeover in foot as well. That it's often they see it as a means to an end as opposed to focusing on improving that element of technique. Another tool that can be useful now, I wouldn't be pushing that everyone should go out and buy it, but it does help quite a lot, are sleds for accelerations. But the mistake I see there is people loading it too heavy, too quickly, and doing it for too long. Like the lightest sled imaginable and focusing on that forward lean, particularly in your upper body, is what's going to get you the majority of the benefits, and keeping them to 20 meters or way under.
I've seen that, Murph, with like 30, 40 kg sitting on a sled and a guy's just slogging forward. I'm like, what's the point to this? You know, that they're completely missing the wood from trees. But you're right, it's one of those things I think that comes off the gym floor where it's like more is better, and it's just trying to reprogram that and, you know, put it into its box of what we're looking for here is acceleration. You know, it's development, yeah. So sorry, Shane, I was talking there at the same time. You hope?
No, you're grand. From a lot of that sled work, even with that lightweights, I really like to make people do it so you're not trying for a max speed. So you're accelerating, yes, but you're just focused on that forward lean, and you're almost exaggerating that knee drive. So when you're coming off of wall drills, it's a lot easier because you have that movement, and it's mainly just seeing the benefit to them of getting that triple extension and getting that knee drive right. So you're not going particularly fast, but when it's weighted or there's some sort of resistance applied, you can feel the movement a lot stronger. Because obviously when you're sprinting all out, your main focus is sprinting all out. It's very hard to focus on technique at all out pace. So again, you can drill it in and have people do it all they want, but when they're sprinting, more than likely their sole thought in their head is just going to be run. Like, it's very hard to think about something else, especially when even over 100 meters it's going to be no more than 10 seconds. But I find if you're doing weighted work, really just exaggerating it and slowing it down makes such a big difference to technique.
Yeah, what can act as a nice little primer as well for that knee up position or even engaging hip flexors is if you use mini bands in your warm up. I usually have them on just below the knee, but take them down and put them around your toes and just stand against something and raising up that toe and knee, pause for 2 or 3 seconds and alternate and just 6 or 8 of those each side can prime your plantar flexors or whatever they're called. I can't remember the muscle in your shins that pull your toe up, but also your hip flexors to just bring that position up, but also focus on holding your posture so that the standing leg or the non-flex leg is still extending through the hip. Making up those sleds can actually be like, you don't need to go all out and buy expensive sleds and expensive straps. Like an old worn small car tire is probably around the right weight, will give nice resistance. And just like if you're someone reasonably handy, they can drill a hole in one and just bolt something into it. That'll work fine for the majority of the work you're doing as well. There is a lot of benefits.
Someone else with the resistant bands around your waist.
Sorry. Yeah, works really well too. It's just sometimes you have fools who think it's hilarious to snap a band against someone. You're like, oh God, you are. Damien, you are definitely that person.
They're not wrong. I mean, funny's funny regardless of what age you are.
For acceleration, you're going to get an awful lot out with stuff like that. And like we said, your little races, because I think bringing in that little competitive element there and just starting off that, okay, you start, turn to the left, and then you turn. And just tiny little bits of coaching on getting footwork right. One mistake I see made an awful lot is that first step, people start with their feet way too far apart and often one foot turned to the side. Like sometimes if you're going forwards, they'll have their left foot pointing forward and their right foot about 1.5 meters behind them, turned out to the right. So they almost have to turn and take a full step before they actually start accelerating. So just getting them into the habit of, like, if you look at sprinters when they're in the starting blocks, their feet are actually quite close together. They're not like that meter or 1.5 meters apart. and the length of their stride or steps increase as they build up more speed, not the other way around. You don't use long steps to increase speed. So trying to encourage players when they're doing those little drills to start with the feet reasonably narrow, staying low, and encouraging them, particularly for those first couple of steps, to keep their head kind of down and gradually build it up, as opposed to starting and going straight to standing. They'd be my main points on.
It is worth keeping in mind too, or say different sports, say the starting position that somebody's going to be going from. Say if you take a look at your maybe soccer or Gaelic athlete versus say a rugby athlete there, where a rugby player could be down a 3-point stance type position coming off a line, and could be actually down in that, ideal position for taking off, similar to a sprinter down out of the blocks. They can be in that close feet, they've a hand on the ground, or they're down in that type position. So when they go forward, it is like that sheer I suppose acceleration comes there in the first 2-3 steps that are kind of ideal. Whereas if you think of your Gaelic footballer who might be upright when the ball changes direction and they have to react, that it could take them their actual starting position is a little bit different there when they're trying to accelerate. Naturally enough, when you're trying to develop it, you're trying to develop these practices, but then swinging it back into making sure that I suppose people are kind of used to their own game style practice of it too, and still bringing it about. So like taking your Gaelic footballer there and having them all constantly and practicing say from that low position, that really close position, and leaning forward, going out. A lot of guys or a lot of athletes in that position will forget that they need to actually watch for a ball as well, and they trying to marry up the two takes a little bit of thought as well. I feel that I suppose that's been my own thinking in it a little.
Yeah, that's true. Now at the same time, I probably would be encouraging a lot of like hurlers, footballers, soccer players to, if there's even a potential of a ball being played, be getting yourself in that position first and just being a bit more aware that if you're going from standing up to then drop into that accelerated position, like you're losing valuable seconds there anyway. And like obviously this is more of a game sense thing anyway, but to try and get players to be in a bit more of a ready to take off position in either direction, as opposed to reacting and then getting into it. But that's,
I find with acceleration, especially kind of early on as well, if you're trying to make changes, even videotaping someone just taking off and seeing their acceleration from early on, because I feel like with sprinting, it's something that nobody would have seen themselves run like that an awful lot. So everyone almost assumes they have the same, not technique, but like when you show them a picture of someone accelerating, they're like, oh, that's just what everybody looks like when they're accelerating. It's not until you see how out of shape you are mid-run that it really hits home, and then it's a lot easier for people to visualise, okay, he's right, that is very far out, and that's when they'll see the benefits more of the wall drill because they know what they're doing wrong. It's also very hard to spot that. Like if you're just looking at someone sprinting, obviously no matter how slow they are, like that's a very quick movement, so it's hard to pick out those things, whereas at least if you can freeze frame it, you can show them, look, this is how far it is out of whack. So just make sure you focus on, you don't need to drive that knee up quite as high, you need to maintain that triple extension, stuff like that. It's just easier when they can see it themselves.
and to be fair, video now has become so incredibly simple on your phone or an iPad. You don't need really expensive software. In school, we use Huddle Technique, which is free on iOS, and just on my own phone because I use an Android. I use Coach's Eye on that, both free. There are paid versions of both that you can go into, but for the majority of stuff you'll be doing, there's no need to go past the free version at all. And that helps give someone a bit of feedback. It helps you do a side-by-side comparison, either to them now and them 6 weeks ago, or them now and your model performer or your model athlete. And lets you do it all in slow-mo, drawn lines, angles, whatever's needed there. To move on then to top speed, and again, I would prioritize this so much with every single team at least once a week. It can be hard to go past once a week just because physically a lot of players aren't actually able to deal with it, or at least get the benefits from doing it more than once a week. And you'll just get so much from doing it once a week anyway. That just increasing your overall potential output for top speed, increasing strength in hamstrings, and increasing your ability to move really fast anyway, just makes such a difference to your performance in games as well. The main things I'll use will be to improve the technique will be wickets and just hurdles in general. I have used like A marches, A skips, all like that, and just focus on basic technique. But I do find bringing out the hurdles and stuff like that, it creates more of a conscious focus in the athlete's mind as to what they're actually doing and trying to improve, as opposed to just saying it and just trying to cue. No, I probably need to improve my cueing there anyway, but I do find the hurdles really, really help. And then to develop all out speed, flying 20s and races are just like, and I'm doing a block of the athlete development stuff for the minors at home at the minute and 15s, and just trying different races with different starting positions and staggering them over slightly different distances has made a huge difference to their speed, but also the intent they bring to the sprints. Just like pair, obviously you can't pair 3 lads together, but putting 3 lads together and having 2 meters between them all starting off, and just change where the fastest lad is each time. So you're either trying to catch the lad in front of you, or you're trying to stop the lad behind you, or you're trying to catch 2 lads in front of you. And the increase in effort is huge. Like, they're absolutely wrecked after me. If you give really long rest, and for the first couple of weeks, like there was a nice bit of hamstring pain, but it just shows how increased the intensity is and how much more benefits they'll get from that then in the long term. Have you any, like, I'll give an explanation of wickets and some of the hurdle drills first, but have you any other stuff you've used just with overall top speed?
No, I keep the likes of your A skips, B skips, A marches, B marches there as part of a warm up. I suppose I'm speaking very specifically on what I'm currently involved in, and like the time allotted to field S&C can be a struggle to get enough. So you're trying to make the most of what you can. So then I'll alternate, like between a Tuesday and Thursday night of a training session. I'll alternate between what I do in each night, like that. I keep my acceleration for one of the nights and top speed for another night. But I'll use things like, flying 20s and that, and just those reaction sprints where I'll have them come out, chasing each other, and that it's very simple. But it's just demand. It's very easier to get guys chasing each other and to put out a maximal output there than to just go, okay, I need you to push yourself at 100%, and there's nobody being, there's no. Nobody chasing them. There's nobody to get away from. There's nobody they have to catch. I find that's fantastic. Between that and flying 20s, I seem to get the best bang for my buck out of with a limited time frame.
Yeah, so just to give an overview then of some of the drills, wickets I mentioned there and the hurdles. So wickets, my understanding of many of it would be using hurdles, but quite small hurdles, like just barely ankle height nearly, placing them 1.25 to 1.5 meters apart, so quite a long distance, giving players about an 8 to 10 meter lead in, 6 hurdles laid out then, but really focusing on increasing the stride length and staying as tall as possible to try and bring on that sprinting technique and doing 4 to 6 of those, and then maybe something similar with slightly higher hurdles. So you're talking about maybe a third of the way up your shin, and then a meter to 1.25 meters apart, which really puts the emphasis on the higher knee lift as opposed to the longer stride. And I'll get them to go through 4 to 6 reps of each of those and then go into your sprints. The flying 20s or flying 15s would be where you've maybe a 20 to 25 meter lead in, where you're just building up. Then you have that flying segment in the middle, which is either 15 or 20 meters long, depending on what you're doing, where you're encouraging the player to go as fast as possible. And then the same at the far side, that 20 to 25 meter lead out where they just gradually slow down. I find it works really well in groups of 6 and just a rolling 10-second clock where you blow the whistle. So there's about of a 1:6 work to rest ratio. And like when there's a group going, you don't feel, or they don't feel as much either, like people are doing nothing. And the manager or hurl, like sports specific coach on the side, sees people are running all the time. So they're not thinking players are getting really long rest. But realistically, for that proper speed work, you do have to give like considerable rest for them to get the benefit out of it, so that they're both able to focus, so they're fresh enough to focus on technique and do that right, but also to reach the outputs necessary to get faster. They're the main bits I'll do, and you'll get so much from that. And just doing it once a week, even 15 minutes there will massively impact technique and overall speed going forward. And even like meeting coaches or managers at the start of the season, it's something it's the main thing I'm going to bargain around, is to ensure I get that bit of time with the players once a week to build in sprinting, to build in time working on hurdles, and even a little bit before that, just look at jumping, landing, hopping, landing mechanics as well, as part of an extension of your warm-up. I think it's just so important, and it can be so undervalued, that it's worth it's worth digging your heels in over when you're having your meetings to plan out the year ahead.
I think that you've really touched it there, Murph. It's undervalued, largely because like there's a tradition in sport where it's just the more shagged you are, the better the training session was, and this idea that you should be able to kind of recover in between sets, it just, the optics of it, people have in their head that like that means we're not working. Like, no, that's not the case here. And I found, anyway, I'm not going to speak for others, but I found that there can be a pretty regular kind of conversation had where you have to keep reinforcing what it is you're doing and what the benefits to the team will be. Sometimes you could be on a weekly basis, kind of going like, this is going to benefit us in this way. And it's, look, obviously enough, we're not going to go changing any cultures from our followers podcast here, but it is something that you'd like to see it changing, and you'd like to see more S&C coaches get, I suppose, speak stronger on the importance of it, because often I do find that coaches say, you might have people who are involved with schools teams, and they won't be, they'll just take over training it because they'll volunteer for it. So they'll be like, oh no, sure, I did this with the lads in school, and sure, they were flying it, they were better than everyone they competed against. And then they'll apply that to an adult team and just kind of go, no, they don't need to be stopping up in between things. They don't need to be recovering fully. We can just slaughter them from one end of the year to the next, and we'll get where we need to go. And it's, yes, it does take a little bit of just that, building that backbone. Like you mentioned, fighting that corner in your pre-season kind of conversation about what is important, but then hammering it home each week as well. And obviously it can be great if you have speed gates and stuff like that, if you can show like, oh, guys are getting faster and that. But in general, it's just speaking I find that speaking with the players, getting feedback from them as to how much better they feel running, how much more efficient they feel running, do they feel like they're improving, gathering that kind of, I know it's anecdotal, it's feedback, it's verbal feedback often from players, but feeding that back in and going like, here, I can see they're getting better, they feel like they're getting faster, and that this is where it's showing up in our games. We're, say in rugby, we're breaking lines, our line speed is much quicker, or in Gaelic football that we're getting out in front of the man because we've worked on that speed and acceleration, that we're that kind of stuff. So really hammering home on examples of where that acceleration and speed work is showing up, I think is very, very important.
2 points there that I really want to build on. Your point there on efficiency, I think that's something we haven't touched on enough, that just by improving overall running mechanics, if you made no player fitter and they still have to do the exact same amount of running in the game, they're going to be less tired and less fatigued from it just by being more efficient and leaking less energy as they run around the pitch. So again, make no increases in fitness, but in the last 10 minutes of a game, you're able to run more, you're able to run faster, and you're not as tired purely because you're a more efficient runner. That is surely going to benefit every player and every team. Also, then you say players feel faster or feel more powerful. Ideally, we would build in testing throughout the year and like to show players that you are faster and you are more powerful, to show management that, look, this training is working. But what is going to improve a player's confidence more than walking out on the pitch feel I've never felt this fast or this powerful in my life? I know we should have objective markers, but sometimes to actually benefit a player's mindset, is there anything more useful than the likes of that?
Yeah, I don't think there is. I mean, if a player feels confident because they feel like they're they're in better shape. Like if it's so hard to replicate, the benefits of that, and it's a great point, Murph, that it how do you won't have any nice little spreadsheet there or pie chart or anything like that to demonstrate it, but if somebody can feel a little bit better and feel fresher and feel like they're going into a game kind of feeling like, yeah, I'm in better shape, you could get a lot more there out of them in that regard than just kind of showing like 2 or 3% increases in an actual objective measure.
Just on how to over time incorporate some speed work and make sure your players are prepared for it. The first couple of weeks when you go back training, or even if like with the way things are now and you're getting them to do work themselves in their small groups or on their own, I'll in the next week or two, with a view to season starting as the old way, otherwise I'll push it back. I'm going to start getting players to start incorporating some tempo runs. So these are 80 meter runs at around 80 to 90% speed. So it's not an all-out sprint, but you're pushing them fairly hard. Take some 12, 15 seconds. Probably this time you're getting to it on a rolling 1 o'clock with passive rest. So you go, like, it'll be on a J pitch. So it's the end line to the far 65, around 80 meters. Take your 40-ish seconds rest, 45, turn around, do the same thing back. So that way, like, they're running at a reasonable pace, but it's not flat out sprinting. That's going to give the hamstrings some exposure to like reasonably high speeds. If you're with someone else, I'll probably incorporate a few Nordics there, maybe 2 sets of 4 at the end, and maybe in their gym session there'll be those, those hip drops where you're lying on your back, you've your knees bent, and you're on something that'll slide, and you're just slowly lowering your hips down as your feet drop out. There's definitely a fancy name for them. I can't think of it now. That'll be under their gym session day along with some jumps. After 3 to 4 weeks of that, I'll start incorporating some maybe flying 10s or flying 15s, because you're saying to players to push it at 100%. And even if they think they are, a good few without that competitive edge will still only be hitting 92, 95, maybe 97%. After 3 weeks, you'll push them out to flying 20s. So you'd hope at somewhere in those 20 meters to go and hit top speed, and then slowly start integrating your races. And then for maybe 6 weeks, that I might do 3 weeks pushing the races a week easy, then another 3 weeks of pushing the races, either slightly longer or slightly more. I'll rarely go past, I'll usually do it 4 1 week, 5 next week, 6 the next week, take a bit of a break, and then load it up again. Just so that it's not a massive overload. And that's realistically, with your few drills as an extension of your warm-up, that's how you're putting in speed. It's certainly not overcomplicated, and you will get by a mile the most from the very little there. And that's how I'm going to put it in. Are you looking any differently, or even days of the week, how would you plan things out that way?
Well, actually, first thing before we jump into anything there, I'd just like to, for anyone listening, to remind people that we have done a full episode on things like our tempo runs and that. If you want to look back at some of our earlier episodes, we've gone into a lot more detail on these, but especially because now I suppose we're all waiting guidance on what's going to come in the new year. But if you want to be ready, make sure you look back over some of our earlier podcasts there for some of the topics that John just covered there in a lot more focused detail. Shane, I just slipped that in there before you gave us your nuggets.
No, I was actually just going to say Murph's dead right. Like, the main thing I like to kind of reassure people with speed is you will get an awful lot out of not an awful, like, there's not a huge amount of speed work that you have to do to see a significant difference. Like, it's not like maybe with resistance training you need 2-3 sessions a week to make kind of a substantial difference, where it can be just integrated into the warm-up or the beginning of sessions to make a massive difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as for the actual programming over the next few weeks, Murph, it's going to be something similar from the GA groups that I'm involved in. With rugby, it's a little bit different because if we look at club rugby, for example, the AL is possibly not going to go ahead this year. We don't know. We don't know if it'll stay at Munster, Leinster, the regional leagues that were going on or what. So at the moment, it's very much kind of just, for anything that we're doing, it's just integrated into the the warm up, just get movement again, get back used to running, get back to running with a degree of intensity, because a lot I do know that a lot of people kind of went back to their lockdown 5Ks, which overall benefit general fitness, but again, there's a big difference between those 5Ks and any kind of explosive or intermittent type running that might go on or that does go on in field based sports. So a lot of it will depend before I kind of, I suppose, hammer down on my plan. It will depend on what's going to come ahead, but in a general sense, I would have the same approach to you. In a normal season, if we're approaching a normal kind of setup, it will be that progression. It's just working through things like tempo runs. I find are fantastic. They're great for getting everyone going. On a rolling minute clock, but you can stand to the side of the field and you can see how guys are moving before you ever get up to working on acceleration and speed development. You can kind of see, you can get a good idea because you've got a good wide space, good length. You can really see what different guys' running mechanics are like, and you can kind of focus in then on like how you might approach different athletes in that regard, which obviously trying in a team-based setting, focusing on the individual can be quite tough. But I find that with tempo runs, because everyone is spread out and there's such a big area, you can really kind of take a look at how guys are moving, and then you start to develop it on and to build up that speed by shortening down the distance. But yeah, tempo runs is where I'll kind of start off, and with a rolling minute clock, I think we discussed it back at the time, I normally put in some kind of an exercise in there, partially to kind of it's part of a pre-season, it's partially to kind of keep other game coaches happy that we're not just standing around for 40 seconds twiddling our thumbs, but and partially just to kind of keep the guys mentally kind of going as well, that they're not turning around at the end of the session going like, come on, like that was too easy, even though we'll be gradually increasing it and it gets tougher. I do find that I put in an exercise. There could be something like push-ups, crunches, something that isn't going to leave a massive or any kind of load or demand going through the legs. That's kind of how I would start off, and then it's moving its development on from there, depending on how long of a pre-season you have. I'll edit back from that.
And days of the week wise with rugby games are usually Saturday, is it? If it wasn't normal
Saturday.
season. Do you do your top speed work Tuesday or Thursday then?
I do top speed work on Tuesday, and I do acceleration on a Thursday.
Right. Yeah. No, I'd be the same. Like generally, like, obviously there isn't that kind of consistency in GA matches, but I would always try and do the top speed work Tuesday, unless there's been a Sunday evening game. Then I'll push it back to the Thursday. And even if there is a game Saturday, I'll still try to do it that Thursday. I just might only do two of them or whatever, just to keep an element of freshness. Sometimes that can be another difficult chat with the manager or the coaches. Are like, oh no, you don't want any hamstrings going here and train. I'm like, hamstring is going to go in 2 sprints on Thursday. You'll be fairly sure they're going to go in the first sprint Saturday evening in the game anyway. So
yeah,
it's to provide that protective effect. A couple of people worth following that just I would have gotten a nice bit from. I think we've chatted about it before, but Kerwin and Flat have some really good stuff on sprint stuff, just at Rugby Strength Coach. Who I got a massive amount from was Shane McCormack. He's Phil Healy's coach and a couple of other Irish sprinters. He works with Tipperary hurlers last 2, if not 3 years. Actually, in fairness, they've had a sprint coach in for about the last 10 years. It's been 3 different people over time, but they've really focused in on quality of running movements and mechanics.
I know that's in Waterford as well this year, Murph. I'm not sure who's come in, but I know that the Waterford hurlers,
Martin Bennett, I think he's from Offaly. Yeah, Martin Bennett from Offaly. He's active enough on Instagram anyway. I'm not sure about Twitter, but over lockdown, Shane McCormack did a workshop for Wexford GA, and if you could get your hands on that somewhere, I thought it was absolutely top class. And he really, really focused in on the most basic exercises and how to get the most from the least. And he just, as he said himself, low-hanging fruit. These 2 or 3 drills will get you so many benefits over time. if you want to push it on a little bit, then Dan Paff and Stu McMillan over in Altus, they've actually put out a couple of little booklets over the last few months as well, just free PDF downloads of drills to do, sprints to do, suggested workouts to do, and like so simple, but so effective that could form part of, if you're giving players a session doing their own, like the videos are laid out of what to do, or you could incorporate it as a 20-minute block before you go into some more sports specific work. There are books then like is What We Need Is Speed by Hank Krayenhoff, but some of those I'll be honest, they go over my head. I could say I read them and I found them so beneficial, but I'm not smart enough to fully understand stuff like that.
But simplicity, Murph, simplicity is the key to a lot of this. Like, you know, that, and I it's something when you mentioned Keir, like breaking things, you know, you do come, there are a lot of coaches out there who just go a little bit too far with try to recorrect people's running techniques, or to keep hammering home a multitude of different exercises to just try and improve speed. Sometimes you have to allow the athlete to, you know, working through the drills to push themselves a little bit more. And it's one thing that I suppose Keir highlights a lot, is that like a lot of the best athletes in their fields have technical issues in their running technique, and yet you might be looking at, say, someone like Usain Bolt, or he often will look at Cristiano Ronaldo and the different things in how he might run. That, right, if you're looking at the perfect running technique, if you're looking at that, these guys don't fit into it, but yet they're at the top end of athletic development, and the top end of their they've reached the peak of their careers, you know, in their areas. They've sent Usain Bolt, the fastest man to ever exist. You know, you can still pick holes and gaps and flaws in his technique, and it does bring around about the point that you're trying to improve someone's speed, the ability of them to get from point A to point B in as short a time as possible. You don't necessarily have to recorrect everything they're doing. You're just trying to make small pointers. You're trying to help guide, but the ultimate goal is to get them from A to B as quick as possible. And if they do it with some flaws and some, you know, bits that doesn't necessarily hit things as you think that they should be, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to keep hammering on changing what they're doing. So it's simplicity sometimes, you know, like you don't need to always overcomplicate how you're going about things with an athlete. Now, that's just a general kind of a thought process I have, but I'm not sure if you've thought much about that or come across anything like that.
Oh, very true. Like it's the cost to benefit. Like if someone has a massive deficiency in their technique and you think correcting this and spending the 4 to 6 weeks correcting it will pay off in the long term, then definitely do. But for some tiny little thing that's not going to lead to an injury, that's not like having an impact on overall energy output, or won't really have an impact on their top speed, then you're as well to leave it off. But you know, that's your own coach's license to say what's worth stepping in and correcting and what's not. And that goes for, you know, more than speed as well. To be fair to Kerr as well, he has drawn from a lot of top sprint coaches and interviewed him and taken advice from them and distilled it down a little bit further, which to be honest I think is something he's excellent at as well. Others I have found very good is Chris Corfist. He's wrote the Sprinters Compendium. I actually haven't found Franz Bosch because I just don't understand his stuff. It's far too, it's way too advanced for me. I'd love to say that, I got so much from his, sorry, I'm too stupid for stuff like that. And then who is also good as well it's actually very good, is Jonas Toya Dadu. I hope I haven't completely butchered his name, but he is excellent. And some of his video breakdowns of sprinters are excellent if you come across them as well. Some of them are on.
He's a lot on YouTube.
Yeah,
they're fantastic resources just to give a look at.
Yeah. Shane, anything else on speed to wrap us up?
For resources, no, you kind of touched on it there, but Altus actually have a lot of even free resources, especially if you're only new into kind of getting into speed. There's a lot of introductory stuff that's free on their website that's actually really, really helpful.
That's it then from us. Nice and hopefully direct and to the point. Next week we'll be back, hopefully chatting about some fitness testing and approaches to fitness testing that we use or we'd recommend, or, you know, the cost to benefit reward of some of the different tests that we may use. And if you have any questions or stuff you'd like to discuss, please get in touch with any of us. Thank you.